So Jesus is very concerned about how we treat those who are vulnerable and who are in need. And so this morning, we'll be talking about a very important, but also a very painful topic of abuse. Why talk about it in church? Well, today, abuse and its effects are very real and present in the lives of many who have called Damascus Road their church family. And also in many of the people that we come into contact with daily in and around Maastricht. To ignore it won't make it go away. And this morning we're going to have one woman share her testimony of living through abuse, as well as we'll have some teaching about how Jesus is anti-abuse. And we understand that there can be various reasons why hearing about abuse might be very difficult for some of the people in this room. So we'll understand that if you need to step outside of the room for a time, that's okay. We're not going to point a finger at you and judge you. If you feel like this is a little heavy for me, for whatever reason, you can step out of the room and know that that's okay. A few weeks ago, I spoke on Jesus' mission that he takes from Isaiah 61, where he says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. Captives released, oppressed, set free. That was Jesus' mission. And if we, the church, as followers of Jesus, will love as Jesus loved and will teach what Jesus taught and want to obey as Jesus obeyed, then that needs to be our mission. And for the many who have been captive to the oppression of abuse in its various forms, we need to put truth and love into action and work for their release and for their freedom. But Jesus did that, he said, because of the Spirit of the Lord being upon him. And we believe that that same Spirit that was upon Jesus has been poured out upon his people, male and female, sons and daughters. So, sadly, part of the problem of abuse has been that men often neglect or suppress the voices of women. And men, it's good for us to listen to our Spirit-filled sisters as they live out their part of Jesus' mission. So today, we'll be doing that. And one last point. Part of Jesus' mission, he said, was to open blind eyes. And abuse has been allowed to continue because many people, both individual Christians as well as more organized church structures, have chosen often to turn a blind eye to abuse. My hope is that today, Jesus, through the Holy Spirit, will open our eyes. So, Becky, if you would please come.
My name is Becky Miller, and I'm the Discipleship Director here at Damascus Road. We've been studying the Gospel of Luke for this past semester, and today I'm going to preach out of Luke 6, about showing the good fruit of our lives and building our homes on a solid foundation of Jesus' truth. So we want to take fruit of love and Jesus' truth and put those into action.
No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. And the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Don't do what I say. As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I'll show you what they're like. They're like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on a rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. And the moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete. Word of the Lord.
If we're going to love as Jesus loved, there is no place for abuse among us. As a staff member of our church, I spent a lot of time providing pastoral care to people in our church, supporting them emotionally and spiritually. And a lot of that pastoral care time is spent dealing with the effects, the long-lasting, devastating effects of abuse in people's lives. So I know that it's an issue that touches many of you and many of the people that you know and love. So today we're going to take a step toward preventing further abuse, as well as becoming a church that is a safe place for people who have been abused. So even if you've never experienced abuse, this message has something for you as well. I hope this will help you learn how to support those around you who've experienced abuse. And one way we can put truth and love in action is walking through that long, hard road of recovery with survivors. So I hope that you'll feel more prepared to do that important and holy work after this message today. I also hope that this will help us examine ourselves and ask ourselves, am I really loving people the way that Jesus loves people? Are there ways that I am not being loving to people around me? We're going to look at Jesus as our model, how he treated people and how he taught us to treat people, and then how that contrasts with the way that abusers treat people. So first, let's look at this passage from Luke 6 that Matt read. Jesus says that trees are recognized by their fruit. So this idea that a good tree cannot produce bad fruit was a common agricultural idea that would have been known to the people who heard Jesus speak. And he talks about crops that would have been well known to them. Like he's saying, figs don't grow on thorn bushes. Obviously, that would be silly, is kind of the point that he's making there. So in the same way, Jesus expects that if we call him Lord, then we'll bear good spiritual fruit in our lives, that the fruit will match the tree. So what is the fruit of a spirit-filled life? It's love, and joy, and peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness, and gentleness, and faithfulness, and self-control. But the greatest of these is love. If we call him Lord, he expects that we'll do what he says. He tells this parable about building on a solid foundation versus building on the topsoil with no foundation. And Bible scholar Craig Keener points out that other Jewish teachers of the time told a similar parable to this, but in their parable, the foundation was God's law, the Torah. And Jesus is saying, this foundation is my teaching. Jesus is making his teaching equivalent to the law of God, which would have probably very much offended some of the religious leaders who heard his teaching. How dare this man say that his teaching is equivalent to the law of God? But that's what Jesus is saying here. And so Jesus wants us to build our lives on the foundation of his truth and his teaching. And what is the heart of Jesus' teaching? It's love. Love of God and love of our neighbors. So if you abuse a partner or a child or an employee or a random stranger, you are not building your house on the foundation of the love of Jesus. And it will collapse, and the destruction will be complete. I have an illustration for this. Imagine a Christian, a follower of Jesus, as a beautiful crystal glass. A valuable vessel ready for God to use. So we call him Lord, and we do what he says. Now sometimes people will call him Lord, but not do what he says. This one's plastic. They look the same on the outside. But one is the real deal. One is a person who says, I follow Jesus. And they put his teaching into practice. And one may be someone who calls themselves a Jesus follower, but doesn't love the way that Jesus loved. It's fake. It's plastic. It's an imitation of reality. We want to build our foundation on the love of Jesus. We want to call him Lord, and we want to do what he says. The love of God must be in us if we call ourselves his disciples. Jesus is anti-abuse. The core of Jesus' ethics, his system of morality, is servanthood. Jesus put himself under other people to lift them up. Jesus doesn't press down on them from above in a hierarchical, authoritarian way. Imagine a military hierarchical structure. So those with a higher rank get to tell those with a lower rank what to do. All the way down the chain. And a bad military leader can take that system and make it oppressive to the people underneath. And a boss in a business can be the same way. Take the structure and make it oppressive for those underneath. Have you ever had a boss that treated you badly, pushed you around just because they could, because they took that power over you? And Jesus says, it shouldn't be like that among us in the kingdom of God. He says, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Those who want to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others. I grew up in a military family. So I went into ministry expecting that the church functioned like the military, because that's what I was used to. As a small group leader in high school, I thought that the Christian moral system was based on God giving authority to people to wield over those in the church, and that this was how we kept people in line and kept them from sinning. I obeyed the pastor over me, and I expected those under me to respect me in the same way. I am still deeply ashamed of myself for the night at my small group that one of the girls didn't want to play the game that we were playing, and I told her if she didn't want to obey, she could go home. That's not how it works. I was wrong, and I've continued to learn how wrong that was. I've spent several years studying spiritual abuse and intimate partner violence and reading the Gospels, and Jesus has taught me that his way is different. Service, not authority, is the heart of Jesus' ethics. Today, I'm mostly going to focus on the dynamics of abuse between romantic partners, what we would call domestic abuse or intimate partner violence. But the concepts apply to other forms of abuse as well. When Jesus told his disciples to do their work and live their lives by serving and not by holding authorities over others, he said, the rulers of the Gentiles lord authority over them, but it must not be so among you. That lording authority over people, another way we can say that now, is abuse. Abuse, no matter what form it takes, is holding power and control over another person and doing whatever it takes to maintain that power and control. So maybe you've been in an unhealthy church where the leaders were spiritually abusive, or maybe you've been sexually assaulted. All forms of abuse involve that taking of power over another person. A more detailed description that I like to use comes from a website called A Cry for Justice, and they have many excellent articles on understanding abuse. They say abuse is a pattern of coercive control, so ongoing actions or inactions that proceeds from a mentality of entitlement to power. So through intimidation, manipulation, and isolation, the abuser keeps his target subordinated and under his control. This pattern can be emotional, verbal, psychological, spiritual, sexual, financial, social, and physical. Not all of those elements have to be present. For example, physical abuse may not be part of it. And they say the definition of a domestic abuser is a family member or dating partner, current or ex, who has a profound mentality of entitlement to power and control over someone else. The abuser believes he's justified in using evil tactics to obtain and maintain that power and control. They say he in this definition because the majority of abusers are men and the majority of victims worldwide are women, but sometimes men are victims of abuse too, whether their abusers are other men or their abusers are sometimes women. I've been honored to hear the stories of men who have been survivors of abuse. If you're a man who's been abused, whether that was childhood sexual abuse or intimate partner violence or anything else, please know you are not less of a man because of what was done to you. No matter who you are or what you did or didn't do, the abuse was not your fault. You didn't cause it. You couldn't stop it. Abuse is always the choice and the responsibility of this and the sin of the one who commits it. And Jesus opposes it. And I'm getting choked up because I'm thinking of the stories my friends have told me. The devastating effects of abuse, the fear that they live under, the tactics that abusers use to keep them isolated and keep them silent. And that's why we're talking about this today, because you don't have to be silent. You don't have to be alone. We want our church to be a safe place where you can share that story and get support and get freedom through Jesus. So let's look at the character traits of Jesus, our leader, and contrast those with the traits of abusers. Jesus had authority. God gave him all authority in heaven and on earth, but he didn't use it in a selfish way. The crowds recognized his authority. They recognized his authoritative teaching. Jesus passed that authority on to his students, but he told us to use that to welcome other people. We're supposed to proclaim the kingdom of God and teach people. We're supposed to give them an example of love and service and teach them what God is like by the way that we live and by the way that we love. Jesus used kind words. Jesus did not use destructive words. This section of Luke that we're looking at in Luke chapter 6 is sometimes called the Sermon on the Plain. And this is similar to a longer section in the Gospel of Matthew, which is called the Sermon on the Mount. And that part of Matthew has some of Jesus' sayings that tell his followers very clearly not to be emotionally or verbally abusive. The students of Jesus are not supposed to be angry. They're not supposed to call people names. They're not supposed to curse them. That's in Matthew 5:22. Verbal abuse takes many forms. It can be mocking people, making fun of them, tearing them down, cursing at them, calling them names, putting them down, threatening them, yelling at them. We should not talk to each other in those ways. Jesus was a peacemaker. Jesus was not violent. The way of Jesus was nonviolence. He said when someone slaps you, don't slap them back. Give freely and generously more than is taken from you. Jesus said, don't hate your enemy, but love him and pray for her. But abusers are selfish, not generous. They pay back evil with evil. They respond to even imagined slights with violence and taking vengeance. There's always a price to pay when you cross an abuser. Victims learn what they have to do to avoid making the abuser angry. And this is exactly what the abuser wants. He can get his way through using fear, even without being physically violent. Threatening to hurt someone's family members if they tell. Threatening to hurt their pets if they don't do what's told. Smashing objects, which is a form of physical violence because it's supposed to strike fear into someone. Punching a wall that says, if you don't do what I want, I'll do this to you. The way of violence is not the way of Jesus. Jesus was gentle and not harsh. Jesus treated people with empathy and gentleness. Matthew 12 quotes from Isaiah 42. It says, look at my servant. He will not fight or shout or raise his voice in public. He will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. And we read this now as a prophecy that's fulfilled in Jesus. These reeds, it talks about this weakest reed, and reeds grew as tall as 5 meters high around the Jordan River. And reeds were a figurative representation for something that was weak. Bible scholar John Walton says this reference to a reed in Isaiah, it's a contrast to an Assyrian saying of the time, that all those not subservient to him, he snapped like a marsh reed. He subdued them under his feet. But Jesus is not like that. He will not crush the weakest reed. And it talks about a flickering candle, or in some translations, a smoldering wick. And that refers to the flax wick in an oil lamp. It brings the oil up to the edge of the lamp so it can show light. And if it wasn't burning brightly, if it was smoking or smoldering, it would normally be thrown out. But Walton says that this servant would be a gentle ruler, and this metaphor refers to the way he'll care for the vulnerable. Jesus is gentle and kind. He does not use harsh words with us. It is the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. Jesus said, take my yoke on you and learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Abusers are harsh. They try to get compliance by using power. They crush people, and they snuff out the spark of life in them. There's no rest in life with an abuser. Jesus contrasted his way with the way of some of the religious leaders of his time. He said they crush people with unbearable religious demands and never lift a finger to ease the burden. Jesus' creed, by contrast, is a statement that flows out of empathy and out of service. All that law that the religious leaders enforced with power and might and control, Jesus summed it up like this. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus gave this open-handed invitation to people. He didn't demand that they do what he said. We've looked at some of his disciples when they decided to follow him. He gave this invitation, come and follow me. And they willingly did. In Luke 18, we'll get to a story where one rich young ruler came to Jesus and asked what he had to do to inherit eternal life. And Jesus said, sell all you have and give it to the poor. And the young man turned away and he walked away sad. And the key is that Jesus let him go. Jesus gives invitations. He doesn't compel us. He doesn't cajole us or manipulate us. So what effect did this teaching about love have on one of Jesus' first disciples? Last semester, we studied 1 Peter. Simon Peter was a disciple of Jesus, and he learned from Jesus, and he taught what Jesus said. So Jesus repeatedly taught Simon Peter using repetition. And Simon Peter repeated what Jesus taught him repeatedly. That's repetitious, I know. That's the point. Because repetition is memorable. And repeating the truth is powerful. So here are some examples of how Simon says what Jesus says. In Peter's letters, he gave instructions to people in positions of cultural authority to tell them how to use that authority appropriately as followers of Jesus. Peter wrote instructions for church leaders. He said, care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you can get out of it, but because you're eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care. Remember that phrase from Jesus? Lead them by your own good example. I like that the way Eugene Peterson paraphrases some of Peter's words in the Message translation of the Bible. He says, not calculating what you can get out of it, not bossily telling others what to do, but tenderly showing them the way. Peter wrote instructions to husbands, and in a patriarchal culture, husbands had authority over their wives, and many of them abused it. So Peter said to husbands, be good husbands to your wives, honor them, delight in them. As women, they lack some of your advantages, but in the new life of God's grace, you're equals. Treat your wives then as equals, so your prayers don't run aground. And Peter wrote instructions to all Christians. Be agreeable, be sympathetic, be loving, be compassionate, be humble. That goes for all of you, no exceptions, no retaliation, no sharp-tongued sarcasm. Instead, bless. That's your job, to bless. You'll be a blessing and you'll get a blessing. Very clear instructions for us to follow, to love as Jesus loved. It's one thing to say we love people, but to really daily treat them with gentleness and kindness like Jesus. That's what we need to do. So how do we apply this in our church? I've had many conversations with women who say they're having relationship problems or difficult times in their relationships. As they talk, what they describe are the ways that their partners treat them. He yelled at me until I was sobbing. He threw my cell phone against the wall and shattered it. He makes me do things when we have sex that I really am not comfortable doing. These are all examples of abusive actions, but sometimes people are being abused and they don't realize it because their partners aren't leaving bruises on them. They think abuse is only physical violence. They think abusers are terrible people all the time. They don't realize that abusers can be some of the most charming people in the world. And that abuse takes many forms. So they excuse the way that their partners are treating them. Well, he's dealing with a lot of stress, and unfortunately he takes it out on me. Or he has to be authoritarian at work, and he just brings that home with him. Or if I hadn't nagged him, he wouldn't have exploded at me. They think being abused is normal. They think that being abused is normal. Or they think it's their fault. Or sometimes they realize they are being abused, but they can't get out. They're trapped. They're financially dependent in an abusive relationship, whether it's a parent or a partner. They can't get out, and that's part of the abusive tactic, to isolate the victim and make them dependent so they can't leave. It's that entitlement to power and control. And sometimes they think, well, everyone thinks this person is such a good person, they won't believe me if I tell them what happens behind closed doors when no one else can see. No one's going to believe me. Let me tell you this, I will believe you. And the servant leaders of our church will believe you, and Pastor Matthew will believe you. We believe you and care. You may be recognizing that you are in or have been in a destructive relationship. And that can be a shocking realization. In order to cope with difficult life circumstances, sometimes we excuse away things that shouldn't be excused, or we think something's normal when it shouldn't be normal, just to help ourselves cope. But if you're realizing that you've experienced a destructive relationship with a roommate or a boss or a partner or parents, and you want to talk about that, please send me a message on the city, or Pastor Matthew, if you'd like to talk to him. Send us a message and let us know that you want to talk about that. We are setting up a new care team at church to provide ongoing care and support for people who want that from the church, spiritual support and emotional support. And we can connect you with social services, those practical things that you'll need in order to get out of a destructive situation. If you're recognizing that you've treated someone in your life abusively, Jesus is calling you to repent. One way you can walk out that repentance is by willingly submitting yourself to an abuser's intervention program. Overcoming that deep-seated entitlement to power and control over people is a long, hard process, and there are professionals who can walk you through that process. And in the meantime, you can set those you're hurting free to build a life away from your abuse. Get healthy for the sake of your own right relationship with God, not to try to get a partner back again, but for your relationship with God. Do the hard work of getting healthy and getting free. Are you a plastic glass? Are you a crystal goblet ready for God to use, or are you saying you follow Jesus, but you don't really do what he commands? Are you a crystal goblet, or are you a plastic glass? If you've not experienced abuse, you have an opportunity to look for those around you who might be hurting. Notice the people around you. Be a safe source of God's healing to hurting people. When someone tells you about their relational experiences and you think they might be a victim of abuse, listen and believe them and remind them that Jesus condemns those choices that their abusers make. Don't ask a broad question like, is your partner abusive? Because remember, some people haven't realized yet that they're in a destructive relationship. So ask a specific question. They might think it's normal or they deserve it. Ask more questions like, does your husband call you names? That could indicate verbal abuse. Or do you have to account for every penny you spend? Are you not allowed to have your own bank account? That could be financial abuse. Or does he convince you to do things sexually you don't want to do? That could be sexual abuse. And it's important to know that sexual abuse can happen in marriages too. A healthy, mutually respecting, mutually consensual sexual relationship in marriage is very important too. A marriage certificate is not licensed to have sex in whatever way you want, at whatever time your spouse wants, or that you want to do it. Your spouse needs to be consenting to that as well. There can be sexual abuse in marriage, and some people don't realize that. You can ask, do you feel like a child instead of an adult in your relationship? And that can show an overall pattern of abuse. And you can ask if they want you to help them call the police. Domestic violence is a criminal matter. We don't keep that hidden in the church. The police need to be involved. If children are being abused, church leaders have a responsibility to go to the police. If it's an adult, give them the option and the support if they want to do that. As much as you want to help your friend, don't take the place of an abuser in their lives by telling them what to do or forcing them to make a decision. Offer to help, but let them make that choice themselves. Realize that in an international church, someone may be dependent on their partner for a residence permit, and they're afraid to involve the police because that could mean being kicked out of the country. There are a lot of complicating factors, so be very careful with that information. And take extreme caution to protect someone who makes an abuse disclosure to you. Never tell the alleged abuser what the victim has said to you. We don't send a couple together to marriage counseling if we suspect any kind of abuse in the relationship. People would need to go to separate therapists with different specialties. An abuser would need to go to a batterer's intervention specialist who can help them overcome that entitlement to power and control. And a victim would be better going to someone who can help them, who's good at helping them recover from the effects of abuse. As a church, we want to be a safe place for healing. A friend is going to come and share her story. She finally broke free from an abusive man through divorce. When a marriage covenant is broken by an abuser, by their abusive actions, the victim is not obligated to stay in that marriage and wait or hope for the abuser to change. They're free from that. The covenant is already broken by the abuser. And if the victim then chooses divorce as a way of escape, that's a right and godly thing to do. Believe that victims can become survivors and not stay under bondage. So after my friend shares, she wrote a poem that Pastor Matthew has set to music. And so after she shares her story, Emma is going to come and she's going to play this song for us to hear. Would you come now?
and take a stand. God knows your trials and comes with His love and grace too. Your heart like a dress that has been torn, garment full of holes that is damaged and worn. But I can see you're wearing new clothes of dignity, value, and respect. Healing in your beautiful heart, breaking patterns and being smart. History will not be repeated. Forgiveness replacing the struggle. In Jesus' name, stepping out of that bubble into the bright, safe, loving future that you needed. Your heart like a dress that has been torn, garment full of holes that is damaged and worn. But I can see Jesus bought you new clothes of dignity, value, and respect. May you live in His promises, the complete plan and calling He wants to give. May you open your heart more and more. He entered a long time ago. The heavenly door. I can see you wearing new clothes. You're dressed up with somewhere to go. Can't you see Jesus bought you new clothes of dignity, value, and respect?
Jesus is our example, and Jesus is a servant. Jesus invites us, and Jesus welcomes us. Jesus is kind and gentle. Let's be people of God who love like Jesus loved. Grace, mercy, and peace, which come from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, continue to be with us who actively live in truth and love. Have the greatest Sunday afternoon of your lives.